Welcome to Is That Homeopathy, where ancient wisdom meets modern healing. We're here to demystify homeopathy and share practical, heart centered insights for your holistic journey. Let's get into it. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Astral Meadow.
And I am Ashley Fedorovich, and we are the hosts of Is That Homeopathy? Today on the channel, we are going to be talking about the homeopathy movement. So, what it is, what it isn't, and how to move it forward. So,
Yes, some people think it's just sugar pills, and some people think it's essential oils, but we are going to talk about some of these common misconceptions and help straighten this out for you guys.
yes, homeopathy definitely gets a lot of heat from
Hmm.
people that are outside of the community. So, as you had mentioned, some people think it's all placebo, some people think it's pseudoscience, and then, there's others that swear by it. So which is it really? Like, where does it land on that spectrum?
Right. So it might ruffle some feathers as we make certain statements, but um, there is a lot of science behind why homeopathy works. And it's not this mysterious, esoteric belief system. It is logical, it has structure, and there is real healing that occurs when working with this potent yet diluted form of medicine.
Yeah. And it's good to ruffle some feathers sometimes because that's how you grow. That's how you move forward when your beliefs are challenged and, you're looking at somebody else's perspective. That's never a bad thing to be able to see a different perspective on things. So,
Right. And we had to go through that on our
oh
journey as
yeah.
well. It
Oh
challenged
yeah.
many common preconceptions that I had. And
Yeah.
that's okay. Like, sit with that uncomfortable energy, I guess, and ask yourself why it has to look a certain way. So,
Yeah, and ask yourself why it makes you uncomfortable because
mhm.
a lot of times that's where the true healing is found. Sitting in it and understanding why it's so triggering to you. Um, really do
Yeah.
that deep work, get out your journal and start writing some stuff down about that.
Right.
So,
So, let's
um,
talk about what the movement is.
yeah, so homeopathy is one of the most widely used forms of alternative medicine in the world, actually. It's still very heavily practiced in many countries, actually in over 80 countries. It's recognized and practiced, and there's even countries out there that have whole hospitals dedicated to homeopathic medicine, which I think is just awesome.
Yes, I think in India it was like about 50-50, like
Yeah.
50% of the entire population of India uses homeopathy as their main source of medicine. So it's not fringe. It's been used for over 2 centuries, and it is used by millions from families to doctors to midwives and veterinarians.
And I would even throw in their gardeners,
Yes.
right? So there's a whole like homeopathic use in agriculture as well. And I think this is all, based on the fact that it's homeopathy itself is based off of sound scientific principles, right? Repeatable, observable principles. And it just so happens that these principles focus on helping the whole person without suppressing symptoms and without using toxic substances or putting toxic substances in the body. Um, it works with the body's natural healing ability that we as homeopaths call the vital force. And it allows symptoms to be moved out instead of pushed deeper in.
Yes. So it's patient centered, it's precise, and it's safe enough for newborns, elders, and even during pregnancy. So the fact that it's gentle and safe makes it my first go-to in any situation. So,
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that that's a really good place that if we could encourage you as subscribers and as supporters of this channel to get to that point of homeopathy becoming your first line of defense, then I think that we're 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 getting the message out there in the way that we intend it to get out there, right? So
Yes.
so let's clear this up. Let's talk a little bit about what homeopathy isn't, right? And we know that it's not the same as herbal medicine, right?
Right. Which I can see the confusion because there are many of our remedies that do come from plants. So the mother tincture might look similar to the mother tincture that an herbalist is using. And it doesn't mean that the way an herbalist views, the overall dynamic of that plant, that does sometimes play into our knowledge on it, but we're applying it from different perspectives. Um, and so that is probably the number one misconception is that we're herbalists, but we're just not. It's a totally different way of applying the remedy. So, and herbalists do tend to use combinations where we're focused more on single remedy dosing. So we try not to blend, three or four plants or minerals. But that's another thing. We can use minerals and other substances to make our formulas as well, where they're limited to, herbs and roots and things like that. It's also not supplements, so that is different. I had a woman in our last class that was talking about her friend took an arnica supplement, and I was like, "Well, that's not homeopathy." But, I know what you're talking about. I do understand what arnica is, but the way that that's being applied is not homeopathy. It's also not essential oils. So if look up Photoshop images of homeopathy, you'll get a bunch of essential oil bottles because the internet also does not understand what homeopathy is. Um, and it's not energy healing, even though we are working with the overall energetics within the body. So I can understand, I honestly understand why it's confusing, because there's some overlaps, even with naturopathy. It's not quite the same. Some naturopaths are homeopaths and apply homeopathy within their practice, but there are many homeopaths that are not naturopaths. So this is just being kind of mindful as you're out there that some people are calling what they're doing homeopathy, but it's actually not. It's only homeopathy when we're applying the principles of homeopathy to our remedy selection and the way that we are viewing the person that we're working with as an individual.
So I think another common misconception that we hear a lot too is that people say that homeopathy is placebo, and it is not placebo. If it were a placebo, it would not work in plants, it would not work in animals, it would not work in babies, because those plants and animals and babies don't have the ability to 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 respond to something in that manner, right? They're responding because the remedy is working, not because it is something we think is working. They don't have that level of cognitive ability to support it being placebo. And not to mention beyond that, there's also studies and trials that have shown that homeopathy has effects beyond placebo, especially with the individualized treatments as well.
Right. So it's not just about guessing or using our intuition to find a remedy. Good homeopathy is methodical. It takes time, training, and a whole lot of observation. So we have studied for years now and, treated our own families and then taken classes, and we still have more education out there. And it has taken this long to get precise enough within our own process to really understand the best way to match a remedy. And so it is very methodical. We have specific books that we're referencing, and there is a process involved to why we select a remedy. So even if we both took the same case, we would probably narrow it down to the same one or two remedies because it's so methodical that we would pick up on the same things that would bring those remedies to mind. So through our repertory and our materia medica, we're going to use those books to be very precise in our remedy selection.
I think too, it's also really important to point out that while homeopathy is not allopathic medicine, which is the common system of medicine in Western societies, um, we're also not anti-Western medicine either, right? There's definitely a time and a place for um, more modern allopathic medicines, right? So a great example would be a broken arm. Homeopathy isn't necessarily going to completely fix a broken arm, but there are certainly remedies that can assist with the healing process, right? Um, and as homeopaths, we we are more than willing to work with those that practice more modern Western medicine, right? And we just ask as practicing homeopaths for transparency in that because as we're taking cases, the way that the modern medicines work in the system can influence how symptoms present in the individual, right? And so, as a homeopath, we would want to understand that so that way, when we're assessing how the remedy is acting in the body, we can make judgments based off of full disclosure. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, as homeopaths, we believe in choice, right? Freedom of choice and in complete informed consent. And what works best for that individual, like we're here to support you in that journey. Like we're not here to tell you like, oh no, don't ever use that kind of medicine, like, but just help us understand or help us be informed that if you are, so that way we
Hmm.
can set you up for success on your journey with homeopathy as well.
Right, because if you're working with a homeopath, but also on certain medications that might be suppressing, then we might not notice like, was this the remedy or was it the medicine? So it is important to always inform your homeopath what it is that you are taking and not necessarily not take it, but just for their own observation so they can see is this remedy making some change within this individual. And surgery is a really great example of how we work closely with conventional medicine. So after surgery, there are certain medications that they might be on or certain things that they're needing as they're healing. But then when we apply homeopathy, we're able to gently get them off of that need and also help them bounce back from some of the harm that might be caused from those procedures, whether it's a catheter or they're really nauseous from all of the opioids, or maybe they're feeling better, but they have a lot of bruising, or maybe the incision site needs a little support to help speed up the healing. And so that's where we're going to be working very closely with conventional medicine, and we're complementing each other in that way. Um, so why do you think homeopathy gets so much pushback?
I think a lot of it kind of boils down to fear of the unknown, right? And not necessarily being educated on what homeopathy really is. And there's a lot of false information out there on the internet. And
Mhm.
if you haven't been taught what it is, you may have tried things that were, sold to you as homeopathy. Um, and they didn't work because even though they're homeopathic remedies, they're not following the principles of homeopathy. And so I think there's this like bias where
Mhm.
people don't know what it is and it doesn't work for them. And so they automatically just write it off. But in actuality, they weren't really following homeopathic principles.
Right. And just because that remedy worked for someone else and they suggested it to you, they had allergies, so they took the histaminicum or histam I always say that wrong. Um
Histaminium,
histamine.
histaminium,
That's another part of learning homeopathy is trying to figure out how to pronounce some of these names.
100%.
So maybe that worked great for them, but maybe their allergies were presented in a really formal, like textbook example. And now you have allergies, but you have an autoimmune disease. And so the way your allergies present actually is different. And you've taken, Zyrtec for 10 years to suppress. And so it might not work for you. So then you might throw it out the window and say, well, homeopathy is not, this is just snake oil or whatever. And it's frustrating that those people kind of like ruin it for us. And they're trying to do something good, right? They're trying to share like something that they had success with, but because they don't understand why it worked, they're not really suggesting the remedies properly. And this is why being just slightly educated on the principles really helps you share more appropriately, or at least lead them to somebody that's going to help them match those remedies to their individual symptoms.
Yeah, and I think, you kind of alluded to a really good point that, people to want to try homeopathy and want to approach more, their health from a more holistic like perspective, right?
Hmm.
Um, but a lot of times we see that there's such a cognitive bias towards allopathic models that
Hmm.
people will apply allopathic models to homeopath or to remedies, right?
Right.
And that's ultimately why they don't work. Because the models of health are two completely different models. So homeopathy works on the like cures like, and it uses high dilutions of substances um, past Avogadro's number, which basically indicates that it's so diluted at that point that there's no physical presence of that substance left in whatever it was dissolved in, right? And so with allopathy though, it's opposites, right? So you're taking an antihistamine or in anti-emetic or what have you, something that is going to work in your body opposite of what's having an anti-inflammatory. So you have inflammation in allopathy, you take an anti-inflammatory, and people will try, because their whole life they've been put into this allopathic model. They try to apply um, that model to the remedies, which you see a lot with seasonal allergies. In
Hmm.
so many groups, people will say, like you said, take the histaminium or take the allium cepa, but you
Right.
can't do that because it's individualized medicine, and I think that all kind of contributes to that pushback as well. Um, but at the end of the day, it ultimately, I think, boils down to that education piece and then having to kind of to undo everything that you've kind of grown up in understanding about health. You're
Hmm.
having to really kind of break that down and learn a whole new way of thinking.
Yes, and there's also a little pushback as far as anytime you're presenting something that's challenging the norm, it's especially if you're coming out against something like the pharmaceutical companies, which are some of the most powerful entities in the world, and you're sharing remedies that basically can't be patented, that are inexpensive, that can get to the root cause, that can actually help people in many cases reach a cure point. at that point, why would these systems want this form of medicine to succeed when if the person actually finds a cure for their allergies, they're not going to need those medications for the rest of their life. So there's also that pushback as far as challenging the whole structure of the pharmaceutical companies, which, and we even have to be careful even bringing those topics up because that's how powerful of an entity that they are. So,
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that there's good news buried in that, right? Like I think that there are ways to move things forward. And I know like you and I have talked a lot about this topic of, how do we move things forward and how do we approach shifting that narrative? Do you want to kind of go into some of your thoughts on that?
I think it starts just with being educated, being able to look at ourselves through a holistic lens to see ourselves as multifaceted individuals. And so our approach needs to be as dynamic as our own individuality. And so when we're looking at ourselves from mind, body, and spirit, that's a different model of health where with allopathic medicine, they're saying, okay, this is the symptom, and we give everybody that has that symptom the same thing. Um, but when you view yourself, through that more dynamic lens, I mean, it's just you need to be open to the fact that the remedy might look different than what the mainstream model might have for you because we're taking into account you as a whole being, like your emotions, your experience, the symptoms that your body is giving you that is kind of a gift because it's showing you where, there might be dysfunction within your being. And so, as homeopaths, we're trying to find like what is the suffering? Like, where is the suffering really at? Because just because someone has a headache, that might not even, that is just the way the body's communicating that there's dysfunction within the state of being. And so it does, we have to look at our whole life through a more holistic lens. Like, are there external influences that are impacting this? How do I feel about these symptoms? Like, is this bringing up fear within me? And it's a totally different approach to healing and health in general. And it also requires us to, care for our bodies in a different way. Because if we know something is creating an obstacle in our path to overall health, then we have to also look at that. Like, this particular food doesn't set well for me. When I overindulge or I burn myself out and I'm working myself to, like so thin and I'm exhausted, maybe there's not a remedy for that. Maybe that's actually just saying, you need to stop working, you need to rest, right? Maybe there's a remedy to help you not lean so much into identifying with burnout. But at some point, it also is like we have the power, and if we don't listen to what our body's saying and we don't work on all of these external influences as well, then the remedies aren't going to do that much either. So it's like we apply the remedies, but we also have to shift the way that we live and really listen, say, my body doesn't like this. And it's communicating with me through these symptoms. And I'm going to really ask myself, well, what is my body trying to say in this moment? And how can I best support and show myself love in this moment? So it's quite a totally different mold altogether as far as addressing our overall state of health and well-being.
Yeah, and I love hearing that because like you mentioned, oh my gosh, you mentioned so many good gems in there. Like specifically you talked about um looking at the symptoms as a gift, right?
Hmm.
And I feel like in today's society, the system isn't set up for us to be able to do that,
Hmm.
right? And so I think it kind of naturally leads to this whole shift of like being connected to that system, and how do I get my life to a point where I can look at these symptoms as a gift from my body telling me what my body truly needs in this moment, right? And learning how to then step back and challenge what we've been told our whole life as to how, we're supposed to operate. We're supposed to work nine to five every day and then come home and run around 5,000 places because we don't have, any other time to get our work done. And then on the weekends, we spend our weekends doing all of the things that we couldn't do during the week because we were in work all the time. And then, we're just shuffling from one place to the next, and we don't, really have that time to slow down and really check in with our bodies and listen. Um, to what they are trying to tell us. And I think that that's really a really important thing to get out there are stories like, what you're just sharing. And because I know a lot of that comes from your own personal experience, but,
Mhm.
getting those stories out there and seeing the success stories with homeopathy and not just the front page of the success, if you will, but understanding all of the things that kind of led up to that
Yes.
being a successful moment, right? Because there's always going to be that like that one moment that everybody holds on to, right? It's kind of like, when you're in a baseball game and there's the walk-off home run and extra innings, and everybody looks at that as, oh, that person won the game for us, or whatever. And there's always going to be those moments, right? But like, what else happened along those 9 innings in that baseball game that got you to the point, or maybe not even in the baseball game? What else happened in practice that week that got you to the point where you were able to go out there and perform that way, right? And I think that
Right.
that's similar with homeopathy, because as we've alluded to before, it's not just you go to school and take a few hours of coursework in homeopathy and now all of a sudden, like, you're a practicing homeopath. It's you spend years and years and years unlearning and relearning and unlearning and relearning. And it's very much a two-step forward, one step back, two-step forward,
Hmm.
one step back kind of process. And it's combing through like your medicine cabinets, it's combing through your pantry, it's combing through like everything that you take in. And I think the more that we can share those stories with each other and encourage conversation across the aisle of modern medicine and homeopathy, instead of this like very black and white, like it's either this way or it's that way, and looking at it more of a like continuum and understanding the gray. Like I think that that's really like where we have to get to be able to move move forward with bringing homeopathy into more households.
Yes, and you said something that made me think about, as we are applying these principles, giving ourselves grace along the way. So if you give somebody the wrong, or your child or yourself the wrong remedy and you don't get it right the first time, that's okay. And me and you were talking about the other day that the remedies that we really feel like we know as friends are the ones that we've actually had experience with, that we've applied directly. But sometimes that comes through choosing the wrong remedy first. But the good thing about homeopathy is it's so gentle and safe that there is a grace window, and if you give a remedy and there's no response and there's really no shift, it's not going to hurt the person overall. So you can just regroup, ask yourself, okay, what am I not seeing? Did I overlook something? Did I miss this? Should I ask more questions around this? And giving ourselves grace as we're learning is so important, and not just giving up because we got it wrong the first time and we suck at this. And I feel like there's a lot of room, like when I was first learning, where I was like, I'm so overwhelmed. I got Miranda Castro's book and I didn't really know like too much about the principles, and I was just shifting through the Materia Medica, but I didn't understand why, like, this remedy over that remedy. Like I didn't understand the repertory at all. And I didn't understand the individualized approach. So sometimes I would get it right based on just looking
Mhm.
through the materia medica. But sometimes there would be a remedy totally off my radar, and that was actually the one. And so, having patience with yourself as you're learning, because like we said, we're really challenging the model of how we view health and wellness, and that's going to come with, some wiggle room in as far as applying it goes. So giving yourself grace as you're learning, and not giving up just because, you didn't cure that snotty nose right out the gate. And, healing looks different. It's not that we give a remedy and sometimes they're just like magically better. I've had certain colds that the remedies have helped hold me through that cold, but my body needed that cold. And so it didn't necessarily completely turn all of the symptoms off. It made them manageable, and it reduced my suffering. But then by the end of that cold, where I didn't suppress, I felt like a whole new woman. And so it's also, we have to turn off the view of like seeing it as suppression because we're so used to like, I have the flu, so I take like Dayquil and like everything just goes away. But then as soon as that Dayquil runs out, those symptoms are back. And so homeopathy, it doesn't always look like that. It doesn't always look like I took a remedy and now I have no symptoms. Sometimes we have to redose. We still have to blow our nose. We might still need, some nasal spray or take some showers to really clean the body out. We might need to take a nap, which might be what made us sick in the first place, is that we're exhausted. And so that's definitely something I learned over time, which is like, oh, I expected, it to just stop because that's how I saw, oh, you have a runny nose, you take Benadryl, it stops. It doesn't always look like this. Sometimes there might even be like a release before it starts to get better. And so that the healing response itself looks a little different, which just takes some experience, um, of working with it to kind of see like, okay, well, my nose started running like profusely, but then it did get better once I
Mhm.
finally got it out. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
homeopathy is more than just the remedies. It's a movement. It's a shift towards listening to our body, honoring ourselves as individuals, and allowing ourselves to heal from the inside out. So even if that means a lifestyle change, creating a space or creating a life that is more conducive to wellness, and not just taking remedies internally and all this, but like looking at your whole life through a different kinds of lens. Like, is this a healthy life? Like, am I loving myself inside and out? And, it's more than just taking remedies.
Yeah. I think it's really about empowering people with their own choices and taking back their health. And I think if that's, ultimately something that sounds like something you really want to be a part of, then definitely subscribe to our channel, share this with a friend, and keep asking, is that homeopathy?
Yes.
Yeah. All
Let's
right.
continue
Well,
to move forward together.
yeah, let's move this forward together.
Right. Well, thank you all for tuning in.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Is That Homeopathy, where ancient wisdom meets modern insight. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might be curious too. If you have any questions or topics you'd like for us to explore, drop them in the comments. We're here to keep the conversation flowing. Until next time, stay curious, stay balanced, and remember, healing begins with awareness.